I really would like my old life back where I could walk the streets like a normal person, but got people coming up asking for money.
Hello everybody, and thank you for joining me for another true crime video. Today we are talking about a man named Abraham Shakespeare who won $30 million in the lottery, something that is a dream for many people, including me, but it became a nightmare for him and eventually ended up being the reason his life was taken from him. And I never thought I would say this, but move over, Dahlia Deblito. Move over, Casey Anthony, because I think the villain of this story beats them both when it comes to compulsive lying and being completely delusional. As I researched this, I just found myself in complete disbelief at the lengths this woman goes to in order to protect herself and continue to commit crime after crime. But before we get started, I'd like to have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Surfshark VPN. Surfshark VPN. Surfshark is a modern VPN service designed with the user in mind. Their utilities are powered by robust security mechanisms, but designed to be simple and intuitive to use, which is important for someone like me who is incredibly technologically challenged. As you all know, we know that I'm not smart when it comes to anything that has to do with computers and technology. And everything that I learn, it takes me at least a month to learn. Enjoy all the freedoms of an open internet safely and anonymously with no device limits. Yes, you heard me right. You can use Surfshark on an unlimited number of devices, so every device in your home, every person in your home can be protected by Surfshark. And let's be honest, we've been on lockdown for a long time now, probably longer than any of us expected. And we've probably binge watched everything available, maybe sometimes more than once. And until the movie and television studios get back into production, we may be running low on things to watch. But with Surfshark, the entertainment world is your oyster. You can use Surfshark VPN to access television shows, movies, and content that aren't available in your area. I'm a huge college basketball fan. Syracuse University is my team forever and always. I don't care how many times they lose, and they do lose many times, but I can't tell you how often I've tried to watch one of their games on Watch ESPN only to find out it's blacked out in my area and then literally lose my mind. In the past, I admit I have used sketchy VPN services to watch these, but no more. It's really comforting to use Surfshark, a VPN that utilizes industry-leading encryption, and Surfshark will never track, monitor, or store what you do online. It's the one time you'll be able to move freely on the internet knowing that no one is keeping track of your internet usage for their own motives, such as targeting marketing ads towards you. Also, in my research for these cases we cover, I might have an interest in using a VPN. I can use camouflage mode, which keeps all of my internet searches private from even my internet provider. Did you know that your internet provider stores and watches everything you do online and then sells that information to companies so that they can market to you? And there is also a no borders mode, which allows me to search the web in restricted areas so I can dig really deep for all of the details. Whenever I'm doing research for any of my cases, I always use Surfshark VPN, so there's no suspicious breadcrumb internet search history left behind in case I ever become the subject of a police investigation. If you are interested in joining me and having an open, safe, and private internet experience, click the link in the description box. Surfshark is giving viewers of this channel 85% off a 2-year plan and 3 extra months for free. All you have to do is click the link and use code stephanieharlowe to take advantage of this offer and start protecting yourself today on an unlimited number of devices, including your phone, computer, laptop, all of your family's phones, computers, laptop, unlimited devices. It's crazy. Not many VPN services do that, and it really made Surfshark stand out to me amongst all the other VPN services out there. Thank you so much to Surfshark for sponsoring this video, and thanks to all of you for always watching the sponsors and understanding that they are necessary to keep this channel afloat in a time when we are often demonetized due to the stuff that we talk about. Luckily, we have great sponsors like Surfshark that offer amazing services to help keep us safe online. Luckily, we have amazing subscribers and watchers like you guys who don't like the fact that true crime channels like mine and so many others who tell real stories about real people get demonetized when there's people like Jake Paul running around on the internet saying whatever the heck he wants and, getting YouTube's stamp of approval. Okay, let's jump right into the video. So you guys know me, I love history, and I like to sometimes sneak a little history lesson into these videos. Today we're going to talk about the history of the lottery in the United States, which goes all the way back to the original 13 colonies and actually contributed to the funding of the expedition for the first settlement of Jamestown. Because of this, a very little known figure of history comes into sharp view, a man named Thomas Sharp Lease. Thomas was a simple tailor living in London in 1612, and he wasn't overly concerned with the British settlement of Jamestown across the ocean. There was too much work to do there at home. He had to work to make a living, feed his family. He had other things on his mind. What Thomas Sharp Lease did have an interest in, however, was trying his chances in a lottery that was set up by King James in order to provide the struggling Jamestown settlement with much-needed supplies. Thomas was really interested in the possibility that with an investment of only 2 shillings, he could potentially walk away with 4,000 crowns. Now, Thomas Lease got lucky, and he's considered the first winner of the lottery. The money provided to Jamestown through these lotteries was very real and helped keep them afloat, and as a result, the lottery system traveled from England to the New World. In the mid-1700s, the Massachusetts colony was still financially struggling even after taxing its citizens heavily, so they decided to set up a lottery in 1745 that would raise money to keep them afloat. They sold 25,000 tickets, which the colony made 37,500 pounds from, and the total prizes amounted to 37,500 pounds as well, which obviously leads to the question, how did the Massachusetts colony make any money when they were giving away all the money that they made from the tickets? And the answer to that is, as always, taxes. The answer is always taxes. Each of the 5,422 awards came with a 20% tax, meaning the winner would take home all of the money less the 20% tax, which would go back to the colony. This lottery raised money desperately needed by the colony, and the general public seemed to think that the whole thing was fair and good, and it was considered a success, and the popularity of lotteries grew throughout the world, and they did become the preferred method of raising money for everything. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and John Hancock at one time or another all started lotteries to fund specific projects, and some of the country's most prestigious colleges like Harvard, Yale, and Princeton all can attribute their success to funds obtained through early lotteries. But then, in 1769, King George over in England, he put a stop to lotteries that did not have the crown's stamp of approval on them because he was a control freak. This didn't last very long, however, because when the colonies decided that they didn't want King George to be pushing them around any longer, and they began to fight for their independence, they started the lotteries back up to fund the Revolutionary War. But there's an ebb and flow to everything. There is a give and take, a pattern. History repeats itself, and again, in the 1830s, lotteries became unpopular, and many felt that they were kind of scammy. And in 1833, Pennsylvania, New York, and Massachusetts all banned lotteries. Everything has its time and place, though, right? And lotteries always seem to pop up again in those times and places where money is tight, such as the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. In 1868, the Louisiana legislature made a deal with a crime syndicate from New York City to create a state lottery called the Louisiana Lottery that became popular throughout the country, using the mail as its means of transmission. 90% of the revenue was coming from outside of Louisiana to other states where these tickets would be mailed to. When Congress banned the sale of lottery tickets across state lines, that ended too. You know, this was a time when things became very conservative. Drinking alcohol was frowned upon, gambling was frowned upon, all of those kinds of things that were considered to be in like the underbelly, and the lottery was looked at as a form of gambling. And I mean, let's be honest, it is. For the next 3 generations, Americans would not have the option to play the lottery anywhere in the United States, at least not legally, but of course they found a way to make it work, just like Prohibition. In 1964, New Hampshire brought the lottery back. At that time in the state, there were no income or sales taxes being collected, and New Hampshire needed money badly. It was a booming success, not only in New Hampshire, but all over, with people traveling from out of the state to buy lottery tickets and staying for a vacation in New Hampshire, bringing more money in through tourism. Once popular opinion began to turn in favor of lotteries, Congress gave them a pass and made the lottery exempt from federal anti-gambling laws. as long as they could keep taxing them and making money, because the government really doesn't care about stuff as long as they can make money off of it. Today, 45 out of 50 states have lotteries, and one of these states is Florida, where Abraham Shakespeare purchased his very own lottery ticket at a convenience store on November 15th, 2006. Abraham Lee Shakespeare was born on April 23, 1966, in the central Florida town of Sebring. He was the youngest child of Elizabeth Walker, a loving, religious mother who worked at Florida Southern College in the cafeteria. When Abraham was in the 7th grade, he dropped out of school, barely able to read or write, and began working with his father, James, in the citrus groves. But after being convicted of theft when he was just 13, he was sent to a state-run juvenile detention facility until the age of 18. Once he was released, he moved in with his father, who was living in Lakeland, Florida, and since Abraham had very little education and no actual skills, he would survive by taking odd jobs here and there to put a few dollars in his pocket. In 1998, Abraham and Antoinette Andrews, a girl he had known since childhood, had a child together, a son named Moses. Abraham and Antoinette had an on-again, off-again relationship, but Abraham did try his best to be a good father and see his son at least 3 to 4 times a week. And if there was a week here or a week there where he wasn't able to visit with Moses, Abraham would always make sure to call and check in. From the very beginning, though, money was a lingering theme in Abraham Shakespeare's life. He didn't have enough of it. He had been born poor, and his lack of education and literacy prevented him from finding and keeping a good-paying job, especially with almost 5 years of his life spent in juvie. He rarely had more than a few dollars in his pocket, and as a result, he spent some time behind bars for failing to make court-ordered child support payments. He'd make that few dollars by walking around Lakeland, Florida, asking local business owners if they needed anything done around their shops in exchange for cash. And he spent a lot of time hanging with his buddies outside of Lakeland's Super Choice Foods, messing around, talking, chatting, gossiping, and catcalling women as they passed. The owner of this store, a man everyone called Poppy, would pay Abraham to run errands and take deliveries, and he even gave him a cell phone so he could reach him. In 1999, Abraham met another business owner named Greg Smith, who ran the town barbershop. Abraham would show up 3 times a week to sweep hair or do whatever needed to be done, and Greg would pay him. But eventually, the two became close friends, and Abraham would stay at the barbershop long after he was done with his work to talk with Greg and the male customers who came in, because you know how barbershops are for guys. It's like it's the beauty parlor for women. They act like they're not gossiping in there, but they are. Everyone at Greg's barbershop knew Shaky Boy, which was the nickname that Greg had affectionately given Abraham because of his fancy last name, Shakespeare. Abraham was really hard to miss. He stood at 6'5". He was tall and lanky. He had these distinctive dreads in his hair, but he was also a simple man, a kind man. Definitely no angel, but a good person inside, and everybody could recognize that. Everyone knew that Abraham Shakespeare was kind-hearted and giving, even when he didn't have much to give. For a little while, Abraham wasn't at Greg's shop much because he had gotten a steady job working sanitation for the city of Lakeland. But he unfortunately lost this job after only a short time, and he went back to sweeping hair and running errands. He would eventually get another job working as a delivery man for a Lakeland food distributor called the MBM Corporation, and on November 15th, 2006, he and his partner, Michael Ford, were headed to Miami with a truck full of meat to deliver to local restaurants. Abraham didn't even have his driver's license, even though he was in his 40s, so Ford always drove, and Michael Ford decided they needed to stop on the way to grab some drinks and cigarettes from a Town Star convenience store in Frostproof, Florida. At this point, Abraham only had $5 to his name, but he asked Mike to grab him 2 quick picks while he was inside the convenience store anyways. Mike Ford returned to the truck with his purchases and 2 pieces of paper with the lottery numbers on them. Abraham gave him $2 and put the tickets in his pocket, reminding himself to watch the drawing, which would take place later that night. And I mean, you know where this is going. One of those tickets was a winner, and we aren't talking some small potatoes prize here. Abraham Shakespeare won $31 million that night, and his life would be forever changed. Before winning the lottery, Abraham worked more than he played, but now that he was independently wealthy, he told a reporter he was looking forward to spending more time with his friends and family and taking long walks around Lake Hollingsworth while still living life on a budget. He told this reporter not much was going to change for him. He said he still wasn't going to spend more than $7 on a meal at Denny's, and he'd still pick up pennies if he saw them on the ground. And you know what they say, you gotta play to win. But you know what they also say, more money, more problems. When Abraham won this massive amount, he was pictured on the news telling a reporter, "Now I don't have to struggle no more." But his struggles were just beginning. On January 11th, 2007, Abraham created an LLC under the name Shakespeare and Associates using his lawyer's Lakeland address. He told Marissa Green of The Ledger that his plans for the corporation were to help his community by creating business ventures in real estate and rehabilitation of homes and affordable housing. But he also wanted to use the LLC to start a nonprofit to assist those in need, as he had once been. Abraham decided, as most winners do, to take a one-time lump sum payment instead of a monthly annuity paid over the course of 20 years. Even though most people do choose the lump sum, the annuity is the better, much more safe option. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Just in case you ever do win the lottery, though, definitely check into the annuity instead of the lump sum, because you end up with more and you end up spending less. And I mean, when you take the lump sum, they take a ton of money from you right off the top, right? After the government took their portion in taxes and the IRS took $9,000 for back child support, Abraham was left with a little under $17 million, which, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, right? That's still a lot of money. It's still a lot of money. I'm not gonna sit here in front of you and tell you $17 million it's not a lot of money. It is. But when you remember that you used to have $30 million just a couple of days ago, I imagine it would still sting a little bit. On January 18th, Abraham purchased a $1 million home in a gated community at 9340 Red Hawk Bend in Lakeland. It was a truly beautiful house with 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a screened-in pool, hot tub, spa, over 6,000 square feet, and it had just been built the prior year, so it was pretty much brand new. But Abraham paid much more for it than it was worth, which is cited in a complaint filed by him against his real estate agent, Barbara Flowers Jackson, on August 28, 2007. The complaint states that Barbara Jackson exemplified unethical, improbable, unlaw business practices by promoting, directing, and executing an inflated property sale. It appears that Abraham was not offered an appraisal, and after the sale, when the appraisal for the bank was done, it showed the house was only valued at $600,000, and he had paid over $1 million. And this will happen. Like, you can get your own appraisal of a house before you choose to buy it, so you can know what to offer. But even if you say no to the appraisal, the bank still has to come in and do their appraisal so they can make sure they're giving you the proper amount for the loan. And it gets real tricky after that if the amount you agreed to pay is not the same amount that the bank appraised it for. So right from the get-go, people were taking advantage of Abraham Shakespeare and his newfound wealth. And this is why many lottery winners want their identities to be kept anonymous, because as soon as they have that check in their hands, everyone else shows up with their hands open asking for money. Abraham's name, his face, his story, everything about this man pretty much was put on the front page of every newspaper in Florida and on most of the news networks. He didn't know or realize that he might need a team of people, including lawyers and PR people behind him, to protect not only his money, but him. He didn't hire a person to manage his money or tuck it away safely so it could be invested or earn better interest. He didn't have a person there to deal with all the people coming out of the woodwork asking for money. He didn't have a person there to deal with the media. He didn't have anybody besides like friends and family who were also people that were asking for money. There are only 6 states which allow you to remain anonymous as a lottery winner: Delaware, Kansas, North Dakota, Maryland, South Carolina, and Ohio. If you win anywhere else, it's the law. Like, it's the law that you need to be available to the press. And the reason for this is very simple. People want to know the name and see the face of the average Joe who suddenly becomes rich overnight. They want to know this person not only exists, but is just like them. Someone who's blue collar, who's had to work for a living and struggle to pay bills. Just the average guy walking around outside. This causes the public to have more faith in the lottery system. That's why in casinos, when somebody wins a jackpot, they like blast the news on the loudspeaker. They put up a big screen with the person's face on it and like the words winner, winner, winner. It's a psychological thing for people. When they see other people win, it makes them feel like they should keep playing because they have more of a possibility of winning now. So that is why in the majority of the states, at least in the United States, I don't know how it is outside of the country, but in the United States, the majority of states make you become public to everybody, and now everyone knows you won the lottery. And we can see how this can be problematic for the person who won the lottery, not just because of family and friends, wanting a handout, but in general, criminals might know you now have a lot of money and they might try to rob you or kill you for your money, which has happened many times, not just in this case. On April 24th, a lawsuit was filed against Abraham by his old work partner, Michael Ford. Ford claimed that Abraham had not paid him for the Quick Pick tickets at all. He'd stolen them. Michael Ford was apparently a regular at this convenience store, and every time he stopped there, he would buy 2 lotto tickets, which is exactly what he did on this day. His lawyers argued in court that if Abraham had asked Ford to buy him 2 tickets as well, then Ford would have purchased 4 tickets that day. But he didn't. According to Ford, after purchasing these tickets, he put them in his wallet, which he placed in the center console of the truck. Allegedly, Abraham then stole these tickets, which Ford didn't even realize were missing until Thursday, November 17th, and at that point he assumed he'd misplaced or lost the tickets until the next day when he was informed by his supervisor that Abraham had won the Florida State Lottery. Now, Michael Ford claims this same day that he found out, he confronted Abraham about the missing lotto tickets, and Abraham admitted to having taken them from Ford's wallet, but allegedly he said, you'll never be able to prove that. The civil trial took place the following October, where the judge decided the money was Riley Abraham's after 5 witnesses testified that Ford had told them originally that he'd purchased the tickets for Abraham, only later changing his story, saying that Abraham had taken them out of his wallet. There's some controversy here. It seems like some of these men who testified, they were coworkers of Abraham's and Michael Ford's, but it does seem like Abraham had lent them some money at some point before their testimony, so there was some controversy, but either way, Abraham ended up winning this suit, and he was able to walk away with his money after paying a lot of money for an attorney. And we can see that a change in Abraham is happening at this point. Obviously, when he first wins the money, he's very excited. His life is going to be different. He's not going to have to struggle anymore, as he said. But after this court case by a guy who Abraham hadn't been close friends with, but they were work colleagues, they'd spent a lot of time together, Abraham didn't think he would turn on him like this. Abraham started to kind of withdraw a little. When asked what he would do next, Abraham told the Tampa Bay Times that he just wanted to turn off his phone and go about his day, not worrying about calls. He said, quote, "My goal is to be able to wake up in the morning, get a fishing pole, and go fish, or go hunting, or go golfing. I ain't never golfed before," end quote. Abraham had been hit up for money since the literal moment he had gotten it. He'd actually driven to Tallahassee to collect his winnings, and he brought a woman named Lynette Williams with him. Now, there's different sources that say different things, but it looks like Lynette Williams was the daughter of Abraham's mother's ex-husband, and Abraham and Lynette had remained close after their parents had separated. Some sources refer to Lynette as his sister, some refer to Lynette as his god-sister, some refer to Lynette as the daughter of his mother's ex-husband, so, that's who she was. So she goes with him to get his lottery winnings, and by the time he'd gotten back to Lakeland from picking up the check, he'd already agreed to give Lynette's father, Bobby, $2 million. $1 million for Bobby himself and another $1 million for his children, including Lynette. In mid-January, Abraham's cousin introduced him to a young woman at the bar. Her name was Centoria Butler, and she and Abraham began to date. She moved in with him, and he bought her a new pickup truck and a Nissan Altima for himself, along with a gold Rolex watch that he had bought at a pawn shop. He didn't buy it new. That's who Abraham was. He's got millions of dollars. He could buy a Rolex brand new, but he goes to a pawn shop to get one. In the beginning, Abraham was living pretty frugally. He didn't make a lot of big purchases besides that house and the cars, but the problem was that everyone started coming out of the woodwork asking for money. Family members, friends, old and new, even complete strangers who had seen him on the news, all had sad stories of why they couldn't pay their bills, couldn't afford their school tuition, couldn't bury a recently deceased family member. Abraham paid for something like 5 funerals. He paid off other people's mortgages. He paid off other people's car loans, student loans, medical bills. He even sent money to prisoners who wrote to him asking for it. He gave complete strangers thousands of dollars. He also had wanted to buy his mother a new house, but Elizabeth Parker was a simple and spiritual woman. She was also very practical. She knew that even if he bought her and handed her this house, she could not afford to pay the taxes and the insurance on a big fancy house. And she also felt that the money her son had been given was from the devil and would end up being a curse. She most likely really felt that this was the truth, but at the same time had no idea how right she would be. Abraham also gave very large loans to two men who had helped him out in a time of need. Poppy, the store owner who had paid Abraham to run errands for him, was given $1 million loan, and barbershop owner Greg, who had become a close friend, was also in need of a loan. Greg's late mother, Helen, had a home that was in danger of being foreclosed on. The house and the land had been in his family since the 1920s, when Greg's grandfather had purchased 700 acres in Polk County. And this was a time when Black men owning land was not super common. So it was a very big achievement, and Greg and his family were proud of it. His mother, Helen, and her siblings had grown up on that land, and when the kids, Helen and her siblings, all became older, their father split up the land and gifted a piece to each of them. Now, Greg and his siblings had promised to continue paying for the house so that they could keep it in the family, but recently they'd been having a hard time scraping together the extra money to do so. Greg was sitting in the barbershop one day with loan paperwork all around him, just completely stressed out about, having to take care of this problem, when Abraham walked in and asked what he was doing. Now, Greg explained what was going on. He said he was trying to get a loan from the bank so that he could pay off his mother's house and ensure that that house and that land stayed in their family and didn't get repossessed by the bank. Now, Abraham told him, throw those papers away. Why didn't you just ask me for the money? I'll loan you the money. But Greg was hesitant at first. He knew how many people had been asking for money since Abraham had won the lottery, and how many of them had begun dodging Abraham when it was time to repay these loans. He didn't want Abraham to think that he was like them and that he was just there for money, but Abraham insisted. He left the shop and came back with a cashier's check for $63,000 bearing Greg's name. They agreed that Greg would pay Abraham $540 a month until the loan was paid off, with his mother's house being used as collateral. Now, the first month, Greg paid Abraham $2,500 more than the agreed upon amount, wanting to show his friend that he wasn't like everyone else, and he fully intended on paying him back every penny in a timely manner. And every month after that, he gave Abraham $3,000 towards the loan. But things were getting even worse for Abraham. Even though he had enough money to buy whatever he wanted and tons of new friends who always wanted to be with him and always wanted to go everywhere with him and stay at his house, even though he was getting introduced to new and exciting, interesting people with new and exciting, interesting business propositions, he wasn't really happy. His relationship with his now pregnant girlfriend, Centoria Butler, began to suffer when Abraham started stepping out on her. He wasn't very good at hiding his infidelities either, because although he tried to sneak these women in and out of the house that he and Centoria were living in together, Centoria saw everything on the home's advanced security system. So Abraham began spending more and more time out, holding court in nightclubs and bars, paying for everyone's admission and drinks and food all night, and encountering a line of people each and every night who wanted to meet him and talk to him about some business ideas or investment opportunities. Everyone wanted something from Abraham, but no one wanted to do anything for him, until he met a 36-year-old woman named Doris Emma Donegan, or as she liked to be called, Dee Dee, or as I like to call her, Do Rice, because that is how her name is spelled, but I think it's pronounced Doris, but Do Rice. Now, this woman is a piece of work, and it almost seems as if she was born a compulsive liar and a con artist. She was born on July 25th, 1972, in Riverview, Florida, to her parents Patrick and Linda Donegan. The family moved to Plant City, Florida when Dee Dee was 7, and her parents said she had a very normal and happy childhood. In fact, her mother described her as a gleeful child. But the family wasn't financially well off by any means, and this became a problem for Dee Dee as she grew to crave wealth and try to hide her own humble background. She would have her parents drop her off down the road from school so her classmates wouldn't see their car. Even though her parents were hard-working, good people, that was not enough for young Dee Dee. Still, she was described as happy, bubbly, outgoing, and most of all, ambitious. As a child, she participated in Girl Scouts and Bible study. She attended church with her family every week, twice a week, on Sundays and Wednesdays. She was a cheerleader in middle school and a part of the ROTC in high school, and when she graduated, she got her nursing assistant certification in August of 1991, just like her mother, who was also a certified nursing assistant. And for the most part, Dee Dee was really good at her job and excellent with the patients, especially those with developmental disabilities. And in May of the next year, she married her high school sweetheart, James Darrell Moore. James worked at his father's excavation company, and the newlyweds moved into a trailer on James Moore's parents' property. 2 years later, Dee Dee gave birth to their son, Robert James, nicknamed RJ, on January 13th, 1995. So what I got from this is Dee Dee and James, they didn't have to pay to live on the land because it was his parents' land. They may have paid his parents a monthly rent to live on the land, but they did need to take out a loan for the trailer, which was a 1973 Vindla that cost them a little over $48,000. Now in 1999, when Dee Dee was 27, she was charged with shoplifting in Polk County. She received probation for this. A few years later, in 2001, she and her husband James were not able to pay their mortgage, but this was not their fault. Of course not. Dee Dee told her in-laws that people were out to get her and they wanted her dead. She said she'd been threatened and someone had even set a sign on fire in her front yard as a warning. Eventually, Dee Dee and her husband and her son were evicted from their trailer, and this was the same year she was once again arrested for writing a bad check for $418 to the Hillsborough County tax collector, but she received no real repercussion for this, just a fine and some more probation. Now, Dee Dee ended up working for Arcadia Healthcare in Tampa, Florida, and she rose in the ranks pretty quickly. She was bright, she was bubbly, she was good with patients, friendly with her coworkers, and she was extremely ambitious. Her superiors could tell from the start that she had a sharp business mind. She learned very quickly. This did not go unnoticed, and this was also noticed by her coworkers. One of these coworkers was a woman named Karen Desalvo, who was working as a registered nurse when Dee Dee started at Arcadia. Now, according to Karen, Dee Dee worked as a nurse's assistant for only a year before she was moved to the office after showing promise and interest, and here she was assigned to help with scheduling and payroll. After doing this for 7 or 8 months, Dee Dee convinced the higher-ups at Arcadia that they should open another branch in Plant City, which she felt was an untapped gold mine. She told her bosses that she had a lot of contacts and connections in the area because that was where she grew up. So they agreed and placed her in charge of this new location. Around this same time, Karen Desalvo, a coworker of Dee Dee's, Karen's husband, and Dee Dee Moore had begun a business together called All About Cellular, selling prepaid phones and plans to their coworkers at Arcadia. Karen remembered how impressed she was that Dee Dee seemed to be so familiar with the wireless world and how she already had display models and promotional materials for their business, claiming that she'd gotten them on loan from another company. Now, they all worked together for this company for a while, with Karen as the president and Dee Dee as the vice president, but when the Plant City branch opened, Dee Dee became too busy with it to contribute much, and the company eventually became defunct. So, at this point, Dee Dee's got a pretty good job. She's running an entire branch for Arcadia Healthcare. And Arcadia Healthcare is basically a nursing staffing agency. So there wouldn't be patients and things going there to the branch. Typically, it would be nurses and nurses' assistants and things like that who would come to Arcadia to get assignments for people who needed care, usually home care and things like that. But even though Dee Dee had a good job, which she made decent money from, and she was actually helping people, and a nice little family, she still detested her humble existence as she had when she was a child, and she yearned for more. At some point, Dee Dee purchased a 2000 black Lincoln Navigator for $50,000, which was a pretty hefty loan to be taking on, considering that at that time she was a nursing assistant, and she would have been making about $30,000 a year. But it seems she had a few side hustles going on because having money was very important to her. She enjoyed the image that she could project of herself to other people, that she was well off. She needed to have the fancy car, the name brand clothes. She needed to have her hair done, her nails done, etc. She wanted everyone to believe that she had money when in reality, she and her husband were not bringing home huge paychecks. They'd been evicted from their trailer. So where was all this money coming from to pay for this new expensive car? Well, on the bank documents, Dee Dee claimed that in addition to her salary, she was making an extra $10,000 a month from a side job as a Nextel saleswoman. She was also making another $30,000 a year selling Mary Kay products. She did also use her 1998 Ford Explorer as a trade-in, and she put down an additional $5,000 in cash. Now, anyone who has tried to get a loan recently knows that if you claim income on the application, you need to show them proof of that income. Sometimes you need to show them 5 million different types of proof and then promise them your firstborn and at least one of your legs. But in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was a lot easier to just say you had this money and the bank would kind of take your word for it without asking for the receipts. It wasn't long before Dee Dee fell behind on these car payments, and every time they called asking, when are you going to pay? Can you make a payment? She had a different, dramatic story. First, she told the bank that her money had been stolen, all of it, I guess, but she never provided them a police report to back this up as they had requested. They were about to repossess the vehicle, but she came in clutch with a payment in January of 2001, just in time to avoid that. But the following June, she was very behind again, and that wasn't the only thing she was behind on. She was overdrawn on her business bank account. She hadn't made payments on her car or her credit card through the same bank in months. So they basically said, listen, we have to take back the Navigator. Well, she did not like this. So the woman on the phone who's, calling on the bank's behalf, she's like, can you make a payment? Dee Dee says no. The woman's like, okay, well, you're way behind on payments. This is the millionth time this has happened. You always have an excuse. We got to take the car back. And Dee Dee pretty much told this woman, no, that's not going to happen. You're not going to take my car. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that you never get your hands on my car. And she followed through on this promise. 6 days later, Dee Dee Moore filed a police report with the Hillsborough Sheriff's Department claiming she had been kidnapped from the post office by 2 Mexican men. They tied her hands and ankles together with tape. They sexually assaulted her. They stole her jewelry, and then they took her car. Of course, one of the men had told her that they had been sent to set her car on fire while she was in it, but they decided that they wanted to keep her vehicle, so they dumped her on the side of the road and left, instructing her to dye her hair blonde and basically disappear so the people who had sent them wouldn't know that she was still alive. Well, this is quite the story. Very reminiscent of Letitia Stauch and her tall tale of being attacked and held prisoner in her basement while a man stole her stepson, Gannon. And it turned out that Dee Dee Moore's story was about as true as T. Stauch's, which was not at all true. Dee Dee filed this report to the police on June 21st, 2001, and 5 days later, a Paso County man called police to tell them that Dee Dee Moore's Lincoln Navigator was actually not stolen. It was sitting in his garage because Dee Dee had given him $500 to hide it there so it wouldn't be repossessed. This guy sent the police in the direction of another man named Steve Rodella, who had brought the Lincoln to his garage. Steve said he'd cooperated with Dee Dee because she told him someone was trying to kill her, an ex-employee of hers from Nextel who had snitched on her and gotten her fired, and there's people threatening her. And Dee Dee felt that if they could make up this crazy story and then frame this snitch for the theft, they could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Then there was another man involved, Clement Bonilla, who had driven Dee Dee out to the side of the road, and he said that she had bound her own wrists and her own ankles, and then she threw herself out of his Blazer when she saw a spot that looked good if you were getting carjacked and abandoned in a ditch. I'm not kidding. This is what he said. He said they were driving, and she said, slow down, and then opened the door and tossed herself out of the car into the side of the road. Once again, for filing a false police report, for trying to avoid paying her car loan, for sending the police on a wild goose chase, Dee Dee received probation. This was not the only trouble with the law that Dee Dee Moore would find herself in. She hadn't been running that Arcadia Health Plant City branch long when the books weren't adding up, and the senior staff at Arcadia Healthcare began to notice that there was a spike in spending and money leaving the business at an increased rate. An internal investigation revealed that Dee Dee Moore, who was in charge of the payroll, had embezzled over $60,000. Now, it was commonplace for workers at Arcadia to finish their shifts wherever they were at the time, and then they would go to the office to be paid for that shift. Now, what was happening was Dee Dee would write the check for more than what this employee had earned, and they would either give her the excess in cash or they'd take a small percentage and then give Dee Dee the rest. Arcadia Healthcare began legal action against Dee Dee Moore, but alas, before anything could actually happen, the entire Plant City branch went up in flames, taking all the files and paperwork and proof of Dee Dee's illegal activity with it. Luckily, all the expensive medical equipment had been moved out of the building just right before the building went up in flames. At the behest of Dee Dee Moore, of course, almost as if she knew the building was about to be set on fire or something. Now, apparently the fire marshal investigated this, but was unable to find anything concrete to tie Dee Dee to the fire, so they couldn't charge her with arson. After this, it seems that Dee Dee and Arcadia came to an agreement where she would pay them $25,000 to basically go away, leave her alone, and the way that she was able to convince them that getting back such a small amount of what she had stolen from them was beneficial was by threatening to tell the press all about their dirty laundry, which was the fact that they apparently hired HIV-positive employees and then allowed them to keep working in a healthcare environment without telling anyone. Now, allegedly, this was untrue, but Arcadia did not want the bad press, knowing that, Dee Dee was going to see it through. I mean, that woman was vindictive, and she was tireless, and she would take it all the way. And remember that Karen Desalvo and Karen's husband had started a business with Dee Dee some months prior. Well, after Dee Dee left Arcadia Healthcare, because the place she was working burned to the ground, a representative from American Wireless contacted Karen to get back the product displays that Dee Dee had claimed were on loan from another company. These items had not been on loan. Dee Dee had taken them along with over $100,000 from their company. Dee Dee had been banned from selling any Nextel products while they performed an internal investigation. And in 2005, Dee Dee got into a car accident late one night. The Hummer she was driving was hit head-on by a Pontiac Sunfire. Dee Dee was hospitalized but would eventually recover. The two people in the other vehicle, however, both died. A Ledger article from that time says the driver, 17-year-old Kenneth Duncan, was driving his car south on State Road 33 when he crossed into northbound traffic and collided with a 2003 Hummer driven by 22-year-old Dee Dee Moore. Some people say that although she survived, Dee Dee was never the same again. Now, by this time, Dee Dee's marriage to her husband, James, had fallen apart, and she was a single woman who decided it was a great idea to start dating the 23-year-old son of one of her coworkers. Dee Dee was a 34-year-old woman when she invited this young man, whose name was Shar, to live with her and her son in January of 2007. Shar didn't have a job, so she made him president of her company, American Medical Professionals, which she claimed was a staffing agency, but in reality, she just used it to run schemes and hide money. Dee Dee brought Shar on expensive vacations and made sure he always had on the newest name brand clothing. In 2008, Dee Dee rented a split-level home on State Road 60 East in Plant City, Florida, and she moved there with Shar and her son, RJ. She also invited Shar's mother and her friend and former coworker, Patricia, to live with them rent-free. So this woman gets away with everything, right? She has broken the law a million times. What I just told you wasn't all she done. She also tricked two couples out of $60,000 that they'd given her to help them start their own business because she told them she knows how to do all this stuff, set up an LLC with a bank account attached. They gave her this money to deposit in the LLC's bank account, and she just took the money and then left and never gave it back and never called them again. And when the police investigated, she said, they just gave me this money. And the police claimed there wasn't enough evidence to prove that these people had not just given Dee Dee Moore $60,000, so nothing happened to her. Two businesses filed civil lawsuits against her, one for $3,600 for back rent for office space that she had rented and then not paid for, and one was for $20,000 for unpaid radio advertising. Now, Dee Dee's father, Patrick, claimed his daughter told the fibbiest fibs, but in reality, Dee Dee Moore wasn't a fibber. She was a con artist who would run over and ruin anyone who got in the way of her end goal, which was to make a ton of money in the most dishonest and dirty way possible. And that was the thought in her mind when she met kind-hearted, but simple-minded Abraham Shakespeare, who had just come into a lot of money and had no idea how to manage it. Now, Dee Dee found out about Abraham from his real estate agent, Barbara Flowers Jackson. The two women met at a small business conference in Kissimmee, Florida in November of 2008, and Barbara spoke on a panel about a client that she'd brokered a deal on a house for, a man who'd won the lottery and was very generous with his money. She claimed that his kind and giving nature had touched her heart, so she wanted to tell everyone about him. Now, after Barbara's panel, Dee Dee approached her, and she told the real estate agent that she just had to meet this guy because she was a writer, and she wanted to work with him to create a book about his life, feeling that more people needed to hear about Abraham Shakespeare and his story. Barbara introduced Dee Dee to Abraham 2 weeks later, and it was all downhill from there. Dee Dee became attached to Abraham, telling him that her book was going to show him in the best light possible. She gave him compliment after compliment and told him how his story could change lives. But she never asked him for money, not directly, right? By January of 2009, Dee Dee Moore pretty much had complete power of all of Abraham Shakespeare's money, estates, and life. She was his financial advisor. She collected money for loans due to him. She helped him set up a bank account and his very own LLC called Abraham Shakespeare LLC, even though Abraham Shakespeare had no actual power over that LLC because it was in Dee Dee Moore's name. And through that, she controlled everything. And no one who knew Abraham could understand how this strange-looking white woman, she was over 6 foot tall and she was very blonde, but no one could understand how he'd come to trust her so much and so quickly. Abraham had made it well known that he didn't really like white people and he certainly didn't trust them, so how had she wormed her way in so fast and caused Abraham to push away all his real friends? The fact was, Abraham didn't feel like he had any real friends at that point. He was becoming so discouraged from people asking him for money and from those he'd already loaned money to avoiding him. Most of his friends and family had taken some money from him at some point and very few had paid him back, so they started avoiding his calls. And they certainly weren't reaching out to ask him how he was or make plans to get together since they owed him money and they weren't ready to pay it back. When Dee Dee Moore showed up, already a seasoned con artist and manipulator, she knew exactly the right things to do and say to cause a downtrodden Abraham to feel she was the only person who wanted to protect him. The reason she had been so successful in robbing so many people in the past was because she knew how to walk the walk. She knew how to talk the talk. She knew the right words and terms to use in order to convince someone that she was business savvy and good with money. And on top of that, she was confident, something every con artist needs to be. She was confident in her own skills to lie to and manipulate people. She was also confident that she would not get caught since she never had before. And even if she did get caught up, she always got off easy. Dee Dee listened sympathetically as Abraham told her about how he was unhappy with the way his life had turned out. He never really knew anymore who his real friends were, or if they were with him because they liked him or because they wanted money from him. But Dee Dee had the solution for him. She would take control of his money. And then whenever he needed money or he needed something, she'd provide him what he needed. But if anyone else asked him for money, all he had to do was just tell them it was out of his hands. And he didn't have it to give since someone else was managing his money now. She even recorded a video of him where she asked him questions about how he was feeling, if he was sick of people asking him for money, if he wanted to get away, where did he want to go if he got away.
Do you get tired of people asking you for money all the time, Abe? Give me your opinion on it.
I've been tired a year ago.
You just ready to start living your life, huh?
They don't take no for an answer, so I just let them keep on and keep on asking.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Sleeping on the video camera. So where do you want to go to?
It don't matter to me. I'm not a picky person.
California? You want a foreign country?
About ready?
Cozumel?
About ready?
Yep. Well, how do you like are you going to miss your home?
Yep, I miss it, but life goes on.
Now, in my opinion, this video is very much evidence of the fact that Dee Dee Moore premeditated the murder of Abraham Shakespeare. She recorded this already knowing what she was going to do to him later. Abraham signed over to Dee Dee Moore the deeds to all his properties, as well as an asset purchase agreement that gave Dee Dee's company, which she called American Medical Professionals, full ownership of 5 outstanding loans that were collateralized by houses. In the spring of 2009, Dee Dee bought the house next door to the split level she lived in with her son, her young boyfriend, and her young boyfriend's mother. When Shar and Patricia asked Dee Dee where she'd gotten the money to buy this house, she claimed that she'd used $300,000 that the IRS had given her for chasing down deadbeats who didn't want to pay their taxes. It didn't actually make any sense, but Shar and Patricia were living with this lady rent-free, having everything paid for them, so they probably didn't really want to press her any further about where the money came from. Now, remember Greg Smith, Abraham's friend who owned the barber shop and had borrowed money from Abraham to keep his mother's house from going into foreclosure? Well, he first met Dee Dee in early 2009 when she and Abraham pulled up in front of his barbershop in a brand new BMW 750i that Abraham had recently purchased for over $100,000. So he got rid of the Nissan Altima and he had upgraded it to the BMW 750i, which is a big car. Abraham wanted to introduce Dee Dee to Greg because she would be the one coming around every month to collect the money for his loan, and right from the start, Greg would say something did not feel right about this woman. Although she was tall and physically an imposing figure, he felt that her demeanor was meek and almost nervous. She didn't carry a briefcase or folders filled with important papers, and her eyes would constantly dart around her all the time, as if she was seeing things no one else could. Greg had warned Abraham to be careful of Dee Dee, but Abraham didn't want to hear it, and Greg felt that he couldn't really push the issue any further. After all, Abraham was a grown man who was capable of making his own decisions, and he must have seen something in Dee Dee that he felt was trustworthy. This day when Abraham made the introduction was the last day that Greg would ever see him again, but he didn't know it at that time. 3 weeks later, Dee Dee called Greg to tell him she was heading his way to grab his monthly loan payment, but Greg told her to meet him at the end of the business day because a big white woman walking into an urban barbershop would make people talk. On his way home from work, Greg pulled over into the parking lot of the local supermarket where he and Dee Dee had planned to meet. He gave her the money, she smiled at him and said, "Thank you," but she didn't produce a receipt. This didn't make Greg feel very safe since Abraham had always given him a receipt before, so he asked Dee Dee to give him one. She flashed him another big smile and she was like, yeah, I'll have one for you tomorrow. No problem, don't worry about it. The next morning, Dee Dee didn't call him, so Greg called her cell phone to see when she would be bringing the receipt, but she didn't answer, so he left a message. He called again a few hours later, but still no answer, so he left a message telling Dee Dee to call him back right away. Another few hours passed, and finally Dee Dee called and assured Greg she was on her way at that moment to bring him the receipt, but she never showed up. Greg didn't hear from Dee Dee again until the next month when it was time to pay his loan, at which point Greg informed her, I'm not going to be giving you any more money until you give me a receipt for this month and last month. Word around town was that Abraham had taken an out-of-town trip and Dee Dee had said he was on a cruise. But it was very important to Greg that his old friend knew he was making his payments on time. Dee Dee gave him 2 handwritten receipts for the current month and the past month, and for a short time, Greg was satisfied with that. Until he got a letter in the mail from American Medical Professionals, Dee Dee's company, saying that they were foreclosing on his mother's house due to lack of payments on the loan. And he hit the ceiling, right? He hadn't really known how deep Dee Dee had infiltrated Abraham's money and holdings. He really had no idea that the loan for his mother's house had moved from Abraham's hands to Dee Dee Moore's. Greg called Dee Dee several times, but she didn't answer, so he tried calling Abraham, even though he knew or thought he knew that Abraham was on a cruise. And he left a message telling Abraham about the foreclosure letter and asking him to call back as soon as he could. After this call, Greg made another call to a woman named Judy Haggins. Now, Judy was an old friend of Abraham's who used to go clubbing with him, and she had recently been brought into his employ in order to help out and run errands and do small things. But Greg would find out during this conversation that fun-time party girl Judy had taken on much more responsibility since Dee Dee Moore had come into the picture. Dee Dee had apparently convinced Abraham that having someone close to him that he could trust, be responsible for all the boring administrative stuff he didn't like to do, such as documents, signing papers. This would make him feel less stressed out while he was out of town and traveling and seeing the world. And Dee Dee had suggested that Judy be that person. So on April 3rd, 2009, Dee Dee's lawyer prepared the documents and they were signed, giving Judy full power of attorney for Abraham Shakespeare. But Judy didn't really know anything about business or legal papers. She just depended on Dee Dee to tell her what needed to be done, and then she followed the orders and she did it. So basically, Dee Dee had suggested Judy so it wouldn't look as if Dee Dee had complete control over Abraham's assets. But in reality, Judy was just someone that she could control and keep in line. So Dee Dee actually did have complete power over everything. While Greg didn't have a lot of time to dwell on this new and disturbing information, even though he thought it was very strange, because he knew Judy, like I said, to be a party girl, a fun time girl, and not somebody who was serious about business. But at that point, he was holding a letter that claimed his mother's house was about to be taken, even though he'd been paying way over the normal loan amount he'd agreed to pay every month. Judy told him that Abraham was in Texas, and she had just gotten back from seeing him there, but she didn't know anything about the foreclosure, so she'd have to call Dee Dee and find out what was going on. Judy called him back later to say the foreclosure letter had just been a mistake and to disregard it, but Greg wasn't having that, obviously. That just disregard that letter that says we're about to take your mom's house. No, thank you. He demanded to see proof that his payments had been recorded, and he demanded to hear it from Abraham himself, at which point Judy informed Greg that Abraham was only communicating through text messages because he was trying to get away from it all. Judy promised to have Dee Dee call Greg, and then she hung up. But Dee Dee did not call Greg. So Greg decided to shoot Abraham a text message so he would know what his tall, blonde friend was up to. Greg said, "Man, call my effing phone. This cracker has got my damn money, and I know if you get this message, you can call me back before I whip this cracker's ass about my damn money." End quote. So Greg was pissed, and rightly so. It was shady that Dee Dee had taken so long to provide receipts, and now his mother's house was in jeopardy of being taken when he had been fighting so hard to keep it in his family. And Abraham actually texted Greg back saying, "Bro, I'm on a cruise and I'll be back in town soon. I just needed to get away because all these N-words are bothering me about money." Okay, so here's the thing. First of all, Abraham didn't text. No one who knew him had ever received a text from him before April of 2009, since this man could barely read or write. And the use of the N-word in the text message also stood out to Greg as odd, since he felt that no real black man used that word with a hard R. Greg texted Abraham back, and he said, "I really need you to call me now, like right now." But Abraham responded that he would call in the morning and he was just trying to get himself together. Greg felt the whole situation was just so wrong. He showed the text to his wife, who agreed that it didn't sound like Abraham at all, and they concocted a plan to test their theory that someone else was writing these texts, pretending to be Abraham. Now I have to preface everything going forward. Greg is one of my favorite people in this case because he's sharp, he's smart. He's not the kind of person who's going to get this gut instinct that something's wrong and ignore it for very long, and he comes up with the best plans. So Greg took his wife's phone and texted Abraham's number saying, "Baby, I love you. Would you please come home?" Now, if this person getting the text was really Abraham, he would know that this number was Greg's wife, and he'd most likely ask, "Who is this?" or "Why are you telling me you love me, Greg's wife?" But instead, the response they got said, "I'll be home soon, and I'll call you when I get back." The next day, Greg tried calling Dee Dee a bunch of times, but she didn't answer. So he called Judy again, furious and demanding to see Dee Dee now, so they could put this whole loan issue to rest. Judy told him that Dee Dee had all the papers to show that everything was taken care of, and that she and Abraham wanted to meet that evening at the Hard Rock Casino in Tampa. Judy would be there too, and if Greg could make it, everything would be sorted out and they could put it behind them and move on with their lives. So Greg drives 30 minutes to Tampa, and he pulls into the parking lot of the Hard Rock Casino, but he doesn't see Dee Dee's car or Abraham's car or Judy's car. He goes in and he walks around the casino, but he doesn't see Dee Dee or Abraham or Judy. So he picks up his phone and he calls Judy, and he's like, "Where are you guys? Where is everyone?" Judy said, "Hey, I'm running late. I'm on my way to the casino, but I'm running late. But Dee Dee and her boyfriend should already be there inside the casino, so just walk inside and find them." And Greg was like, "Yo, I told you, I just walked inside. There's nobody here. Where is everyone? What the hell's going on?" And Judy was like, "Well, I don't really know what's going on, but I'm gonna figure out what's going on. I'm gonna hang up with you. I'll call you tomorrow, and I'll figure out what's going on." So basically, you just drove 30 minutes for no reason and we just wasted more of your time. The next morning, Judy did not call Greg, but Greg was not going to wait around to get a call any longer. He picked up the phone and called Judy once again, demanding to know what's going on. And that's when she told him a shocking story. The real reason why they hadn't been able to meet him the night before at the Hard Rock Casino. Judy claimed she had just arrived at the casino, just pulled into the parking lot, when Dee Dee called her and told her to turn around and leave because Abraham was in trouble. So Judy drives to meet Dee Dee and this other woman on Highway 60, where Abraham was in the backseat of a car, bleeding because he'd gotten into a fight with an underage prostitute, and now he had to go to the hospital. So obviously they couldn't meet Greg at the Hard Rock Casino because they had to bring a bleeding Abraham to the hospital. Judy told Greg he couldn't tell anyone because Abraham didn't want people to know he was back in town and he was going to be leaving again as soon as he was recovered. Okay, so as this is all happening, Dee Dee, her son, and her boyfriend Shar have all moved into Abraham's big house. Dee Dee bought Shar a brand new Corvette, and he was sporting a gold Rolex. For herself, Dee Dee had purchased a new gray Hummer, which she drove when she finally agreed to meet with Greg at his mother's house 3 days after the failed Hard Rock Casino meeting. In stark contrast to her flashy new vehicle, Dee Dee herself looked like she'd just gotten done rolling around in a dirt pile. Her hair was in a messy ponytail, she was wearing dusty work boots, and her jeans and shirt were covered in dirt. She told Greg that she'd been hanging drywall all day and then moved on to business, telling him that the foreclosure thing had been a big mistake, and she handed him some papers to prove it. Once this was out of the way, Greg brought the conversation back to Abraham, telling Dee Dee that he'd texted him after getting the foreclosure letter and showing her the text he'd gotten back, letting Dee Dee know that he'd never gotten a text from Abraham before, and didn't she think that that was odd? Dee Dee laughed it off. No, Abraham's fine. He left on another vacation with a new girlfriend, and this new girlfriend's been writing his text for him. And by the way, Abraham's also been taking literacy classes, so, Greg, you might be getting more texts from him in the future. How convenient. The next day, Judy texted Greg while he was at work and told him that she and Dee Dee were waiting outside in the car so that they could finalize this whole foreclosure mistake. Greg once again did not want to invite them in and start the local rumor mill going, so he walked out. Dee Dee was in the driver's seat with a tear-streaked face, and she asked him to get into the back seat and take a drive with them, like she's the mafia. Now, Greg felt this was not the best idea, but he slid in anyway, and she drove off, parking at a nearby Home Depot before bursting into tears. She told Greg that she was under an enormous amount of pressure. Abraham had left everything in her hands, and then he just took off. And now people were talking and saying she had something to do with his disappearance and that he might not even be alive. Now, little did Greg know, the police were already investigating this case, and they felt that there was foul play involved. And their number one suspect was Dee Dee Moore. At first, there weren't a lot of people who were asking questions about Abraham's whereabouts because many of them owed him money, and they weren't trying to look a gift horse in the mouth. They weren't trying to call somebody who they owed money to and they didn't want to pay. But a few people in his life were suspicious, especially after they started getting texts from Abraham, which were well written, knowing that he was illiterate. The mother of his son, Antoinette Andrews, had started getting texts from Abraham for the first time in her life. His godsister, Lynette Williams, was also getting texts and wondering when Abraham had learned to write so well. At first, she was just happy to know that he was okay, but after a while, she was suspicious that it might not be Abraham writing these texts. His old boss, Poppy, that he had loaned $1 million, she was also getting texts from Abraham, sometimes 5 a day. And Ashley McMillan, another daughter of his mother's ex-husband, was getting very suspicious by the texts she was receiving from Abraham. She had texted to ask when he would be home, and he had responded telling her that he was a grown-ass man who would come back when he was good and ready. Ashley knew that Abraham would never speak to her like that, so she went to her father and convinced him to go to the police and file a missing persons report. But when he tried, he was told that he couldn't since he wasn't family. So this is pretty much how things go from then on. No one has seen Abraham Shakespeare since April of 2009. Dee Dee was managing his businesses and his finances, and every time someone asked where Abraham was, she had a different story. She told one person that he'd gone to Haiti, and then an earthquake happened, and she hadn't heard from him since then. She told another person that he was in Puerto Rico taking care of some business. She told someone else that he'd contracted HIV, and he was getting treatment for that HIV. She told yet someone else that he'd moved to another Florida city with his new girlfriend. The stories continued. They got more elaborate each time. Abraham was in rehab for drug and alcohol abuse. Abraham was on the run after assaulting an underage prostitute. He was laying low and avoiding people so they wouldn't ask him for more money. But no one had seen or heard from Abraham in months besides these texts. Nobody had heard his voice. And people around town began to talk and to wonder, was Dee Dee Moore being completely honest about where Abraham Shakespeare was? And that is where we will end part 1 of this video. I hope you liked it. I hope you choose to join us for part 2, where things get even crazier, and an undercover operation to catch Dee Dee Moore is concocted. Don't forget to check out Surfshark VPN in the description box and use code stephanieharlowe to get 85% off a 2-year plan, as well as 3 months for free. Hit like if you like this video, share it if you think it's worth sharing, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, so you can be notified every time I post a new true crime and mystery video. And if you are subscribed, just check and make sure you still are, because YouTube likes to unsubscribe people from my channel and not notify you guys when I post new videos. Aren't they cute? Thank you so much for everybody who joined me for another true crime series. I know I've been doing a lot of series lately, but these cases are just so interesting to me, I can't stop. So hopefully this next video will be the last one in this series, but who knows? I never know. I never know. I want to tell you guys, I want to give you real expectations, but I don't even know myself. So thank you everybody who's here. Thank you to my Patreons who keep me going every single day, and I will see you guys very soon. Stay kind, stay beautiful. I love you so much. Bye.
Battle's going straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery.